Hello and welcome to World History Encyclopedia. My name is Kelly and today I'm talking to Nancy Marie Brown, an American author of a number of highly praised books, who just published a book about a burial in Birka. This burial was considered a male warrior Viking burial for many years, but in 2017 DNA testing showed that this was actually a burial of a female, which I find incredibly fascinating. Enough from me, let's get into the interview and learn more about this female Viking warrior and women in general during the Viking Age. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what your book is about?
Yeah. In the Real Valkyrie, I'm using two very different kinds of sources. I'm using medieval texts and modern archaeology, and I'm trying to recreate the life and times of one warrior in the Viking Age. And that warrior just happens to be a woman. When I started writing this book about 6 years ago, I thought it was going to be a book about bones. I was like really interested in what can archaeologists tell us about these bones that they're digging up, from the Viking Age with all these new techniques they're using and everything. Well, I kind of learned the hard way that it was going to be a book about bias. So that was a bit of a surprise. The burial that I decided to focus on has been known for like 100 years as the ultimate Viking warrior burial. It's called Bj581, and Bj is for Birka, the island in Sweden that was a Viking town. And this grave was one of 1,100 that was dug up at Birka in the late 1800s. This one was dug up in 1878. And it's the kind of grave called a chamber grave. So it's like a little house underground. And in this house, the warrior was seated, and maybe seated on a saddle. There were 2 horses with bridles, and there was just about every weapon known to the Viking Age. So there was a sword, this long knife called a scramasax, arrows, probably a bow, but that had disappeared, an axe, 2 shields, and 2 spears. And then on the warrior's lap, there's a full set of pieces for what is kind of known as Viking chess, the board game Nevata. And in addition to that, this grave was like on a promontory right next to the fortress at Birka, right in line with the warrior's hall. And it was marked by a large stone. So because of all these things, the horses, the weapons, the gaming pieces, the location, everybody agreed this was the burial of an important Viking war leader who, had something to do with protecting the town of Birka. Then, 2017, there's this large group of researchers in Sweden at Uppsala and Stockholm who published the results of a DNA test and a number of other tests of the bones in this grave, Bj581, and they proved that it was the bones of a woman. So our ultimate Viking warrior is a woman. And there was this fierce backlash. Not only on the internet, not only in the popular press, but among scholars saying they must have made some mistake. We all know warriors are men. And I'm like, really? How do we know that? And that was when it hit me that there was a lot of gender bias in Viking studies. So the questions that I ended up answering in the Real Valkyrie are, what does the Viking world look like if we abandon these concepts of men's work versus women's work? And we just look at what would it be like if roles were assigned based on different qualities like ambition, ability, family ties, and wealth. And that's the picture of the Viking Age that I try to present in the Real Valkyrie.
Amazing. When I first started reading it, I was like, wow, this is... You think at the start it might just be about, the bones, but then it just, from the introduction, it just goes on this massive, huge... You just show the whole world of the Vikings. So you don't really anticipate seeing, you see every facet of the lives of every type of person in the Viking Age, which I just thought was amazing, because that's not what I mean, I don't know a lot about the Viking Age, I'm going
Well,
to
I'm
be
glad
honest.
that worked. Yeah, I'm glad that worked for you.
But I just thought it was brilliant.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, you've got this female burial that's caused, massive waves in scholarship and just in Viking scholars in general. And then you have combined the archaeological evidence with a tale of fiction. What made you want to do that? Because I thought that it was such a brilliant way to show how this person might have actually lived their lives. Like you're very obviously saying that this is a tale of fiction. However, this is a way that we could imagine this warrior living her life. What made you want to do that?
Well, I really wanted to bring these bones to life. I wanted to bring this woman out of the shadows. I wanted to, give the reader really that, vision of what could her life be like. And, if you watch a documentary these days, you'll see that a lot of times they have half of it is interviews with experts and the other half is actors, reenacting some famous battle or voyage or something like that. And, dressed up in period costume and sometimes, speaking lines and sometimes not. And I thought, I can do that. I can do that in a book. Unfortunately, my publisher agreed I could do that in a book. But, I didn't start out that way. It's like every book, when you start writing it, you think you know where it's going to end up. And you do a proposal and you do an outline and it's all cut and dried and you write the first draft and you go, it's not there. And so it was like, what's missing? And what was missing was the story of this woman. So like by the final draft, I think 30% of it was historical fiction. And that's because I'm trying to combine these two very, very different sources. Archaeology can only take you so far. Usually archaeologists cannot date their finds within 30 years. And this woman lived to maybe 30 or 40 years old. So, to make it as realistic and believable as possible, I had to start with that skeleton of archaeology and then flesh it out. So, what can the archaeological studies tell us? I mean, these are the facts that I had to work with. There was a coin in the grave, so that really helps you date it. But this coin could have been anywhere from 913 to 980, so it's like the whole 10th century. The placement of the grave makes you think that there's some connection to the warrior's hall, and we think that burned down in about 965. There was a really recent archaeological dig, in Birka that dug up the warrior's hall and established this chronology. So 965 is kind of like the best guess. So if her bones and her teeth tell us that she was 30 or 40 years old when she died, she was probably born around 930. Okay, so I got that chronology. You can also tell from the studies, the chemical studies of the bones and the teeth, that she ate well all her life. And that was really rare in the 10th century, that nobody would go through a period of starvation. So she must have been from a rich family. She could have even been from a royal family. She was also very tall for a woman of her time. She was 5'7". Now, you guys are on the metric system, so that's like 1.7 meters tall. So she's taller than, as tall as I am. There was a king of Denmark during her time, Gorm the Old, who was 5'8", so he would have been 1.72. So he was just a little bit taller than her, and he was considered a tall man. So we know she was big and probably strong. A tall female and well nourished. We also know she was not a native of Birka, that she came from somewhere else, because you can analyze the chemicals in her teeth to find this out. When her teeth were forming, she was drinking the water of somewhere like southern Sweden or southern Norway. And she left that spot when she was 8 years old, before she was 8 years old, and she probably went to the west. So she could have even gone to the British Isles. And she didn't arrive in Birka until she was older than 16. We don't know how much older, but we know a lot about her life but nothing in detail. So then her weapons, they also tell a story. These are not weapons that are there for show. These are not fancy weapons, for some honor, purpose. These are weapons for killing. Several of them, and also some items of her clothing that are really interesting, are connected to the East Way, which was the trade route through Russia and Ukraine to Byzantium and the Silk Road. So that's what archaeology can tell me. This really, kind of, mysterious story about this young woman who grew up somewhere like in southern Norway, around Oslo, maybe, and may have gone to Britain when she was a girl, and then somehow got to Birka, and then went on the East Way, maybe as far as Kiev, because this little silver, ornament that she had on the top of her head, like it was sewn onto a cap, probably came from Kiev. We have two other examples of it, and one of them was found in Kiev. So, we have these nice little stories about her. Well, then I looked at the history of the Viking Age. Okay, so what else was happening between 930 and 970? And what we know about that time, we get mostly from stories that were written down hundreds of years afterwards. And some of them were written down by Snorri Sturluson in Iceland or by Saxo Grammaticus in Denmark. There are annals in Ireland. There's the Russian Primary Chronicle, and there's many more. I was particularly looking for stories that happened within her lifetime. And I found lots of references to powerful women, warrior women who were alive at the time or whose stories she would have heard. So this is what, I used when I started, writing fictional parts. I started thinking like a historical novelist. I put together the chronology, I put together the plot that allowed her life to intersect with the lives of some of these powerful women, but still stay true to the archaeological facts. And, that was kind of a juggling act, but, I can't prove that BJ581 ever met any of these people, but they were alive at the same time. So that's where the historical fiction comes in. I decided I would start each chapter with a scene in historical fiction, and then I would step back and carefully explain my sources, because it's really important to me that the reader can tell what is fact and what is fiction. One thing I did do just to make it easier to write the stories is I gave her a name. Like other skeletons have names. There's Lucy the Australopithecus and Otzi the Iceman. Well, I call her Hervor.
It made her feel more real, I think, having a name. So it was almost like you had the archaeological record was like the chapters of her life, but they were broad, they were just outlines, and then you sort of filled in the gaps, sort of. And I think it's crazy that we know her movements based on chemicals in the teeth and the bones. Like, I just think that blows my mind, that that's the kind of stuff that we can use our technology for. It was crazy. And I love...
Oh, it's really crazy, yeah. It really is.
The general region. And I mean, you've made that very clear in your book that you're like, this is not, you've said this is as much as we can discern, and then the reasons why you've chosen what you've chosen. And I thought it was so brilliant. Like, each of your chapters is very detailed. Like, for example, one of my favorite ones was the weaving one, where women would weave things and dyeing materials and stuff like that. I thought that was so in depth, but then you bring that into the story and you see how that would have actually happened potentially in the lives. And I thought that the detail of the explanation and then it being woven into the story was such an amazing way to visualize this whole world, this whole era. Going back to Snorri Sturluson, right? That's how you pronounce it?
I wrote a biography of him in 2012. It's called The Song of the Vikings, and I really got to know him, quite well. And it's we think about this in terms of modern writers, all the time, that they can't be a great writer, if they're not a great person. but you can't apply that to people in the Viking Age or in the medieval time. He was a pretty miserable person. If you look at how he treated his wives and his mistresses and his daughters, and the terrible relationship he had with his mother. I mean, he was a classic misogynist, but he was a really great writer. And so we have to both love him and hate him, because if we didn't have Snorri, we wouldn't have Norse mythology. I mean, he pretty much was the person who saved Norse mythology. His book, The Prose Edda, he wrote it as a handbook on poetry, of Viking Age poetry, to try to impress this young king of Norway who was like 14 or 16 years old when Snorri met him. And you can't understand Viking poetry if you don't understand mythology, because there's so many allusions to the gods and the legends and the myths in the poetry. So Snorri included all this in his book, and which is why we have it. Because in many of these stories, he is the only source. We just don't have any other versions of these stories. He also included some mythology in his Heimskringla, which is a set of 16 sagas about the kings of Norway. And also the history in those sagas is not known to us from anywhere else. So, if he hadn't written these books, we would just be without a lot of our information about the Viking Age. So we have to, and not only did he write the books, he wrote them really, really well. They are wonderful to read. So we have to kind of give him a pass for being a miserable guy.
Yeah. We'll just have to separate his personal life from his work life, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He I haven't actually read any of his work. I would like to at some point, but at the moment I haven't. He includes Valkyries and he includes warrior women in some of his works. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He didn't say much. He didn't say much at all about women, but there were some that he couldn't, he couldn't drop out of history, and he couldn't drop out of the myths. For instance, the goddess Freya. She was not only the goddess of love and fertility, she was a goddess of war, and she took half of the dead, and she rode to war in a chariot pulled by a big cat. Now, when you see the illustrations of this, it's a kitty cat, but imagine a mountain lion, a big cat. I see her driving a mountain lion. There was the goddess Skadi, who is the goddess of winter and of skiing, and the only story Snorri tells about her, she goes to avenge the death of her father, and she puts on her armor and she gets her weapons, and she marches off to the god's hall at Valhalla, and she says, "You owe me because you killed my father." And they're all afraid to fight her. And so they offer her all kinds of, compensations so that they don't have to fight her. So Snorri couldn't leave out everything. He also tells this great story of Queen Asa of Vestfold, or Vestfold in Norway. And this is, one of these classic tales where the king wants to marry her, and she says no, and he shows up and he kills her father and her brothers and takes her away and makes her his wife, and they have a son. And when the son is a year old, she arranges for him to be assassinated. And when the warriors, his warriors, confront her, she says, "Yeah, that was my idea. I did it. What are you going to do about it?" And she takes her son. She takes the Viking ship. She must have had guys to row it. And she goes back to her father's kingdom, and she rules for 17 years until her son is old enough to take over. And you're like, okay. When that story is told, I mean, Snorri doesn't give you all the details. He doesn't point out that they didn't kill her. They let her go, and she took all the stuff with her, including the heir to the throne. No, but she does this, and you know, she must have had like a lot of support. She must have had, you know, a lot of nerve, a lot of guts. But you know, he can't write about some parts of Viking history without including the women. So as much as he doesn't like them, he does tell us enough that we can piece the stories back together. One of the stories that he does include in the Prose Edda is the story of the Norse creation, you know, the Norse creation myth. And that's one that I find really interesting because it right up front shows you the difference between the Christian view of women and the Viking view of women. So in the Christian creation story, you have God creating Adam in, you know, God's own image. And then Adam gets lonely. And so God takes Adam's rib and he creates Eve to be, you know, a companion and a servant to Adam. So women are the afterthought, and they're there only to, you know, take care of the man. Well, that's not how it works in the, you know, Old Norse. In the Old Norse, you have three gods wandering along the seashore, and they see two trees, two driftwood trees that have washed up, an ash tree and an elm tree. And they carve these into human form, and they give them blood and breath and curious minds, I think is how it goes. And they do this at the same time. And the ash tree becomes the man, Asker, and the elm tree becomes the woman, Embla. So they're made at the same time, out of the same stuff, by the same gods. And if you look at the ash and the elm, you know, what did the Vikings use the ash tree for, and what did they use the elm tree for? Well, the ash tree was used for oars and for the shafts of spears, and the elm tree was used for the wheels of carts and for hunting bows. So both of them, men and women, had uses in peacetime and uses in wartime, and they were both necessary for the society. So, you know, I like to think that this is a clear vision of what life was like in the Viking Age, that they were different, but not fixed into certain roles by their gender. You know, the division was based on those qualities that, you know, I mentioned: ambition, ability, family ties, and wealth. Yeah, so some people had more opportunities than others. Some of them got to eat really well all their lives. Some of them starved. Some of them were captured in raids and became slaves. So yeah, they didn't fulfill their destiny maybe. But it wasn't because you were female or male that your life was determined.
And so we have this idea, for example, you bring it up quite early on in your book, that we in the modern age have this idea that Viking women didn't fight, they weren't warriors, they were buried with keys, as you know, they stayed in the house. But then we have these sagas that tell us that that's not true. Where did this concept and idea come from? Why do we think this now?
The problem really is that both archaeology and Viking studies started out in the Victorian Age, in the 1800s, when women, especially elite women, were told to concern themselves with the children, the church, and the kitchen. So all of the people who were involved in creating, you know, the version of the Viking Age that's still in our textbooks had this concept that, you know, the rich, the wealthy women, you know, the ones that eat well all their lives, would be in the house. And so they, you know, they looked around for an image of the perfect Viking housewife. And people have looked very carefully through the sagas, and you can really find, and the laws and the poems, you can find 3 instances where women have keys on their belts. And there's the really famous one is not actually a woman. It's the god Thor, the thunder god, dressed up in drag. Because, yeah, if you've seen Marvel, you'll Marvel's Loki, you'll kind of understand. Loki gets into a problem with a giant, and he gives away Thor's hammer, the hammer of strength. And to get it back, the giant says, I want to marry the goddess Freya. Well, the goddess Freya has a snitch. She says, no way am I marrying a giant. You guys are going to have to figure out something else. And so Loki says, let's dress up Thor as a bride. And so they dress him up and they put a ring of keys at his belt. And, okay, so I have to finish the story. Thor goes at the wedding. He, eats all the food for the wedding banquet. And then he stands up and knocks his groom on the head with the hammer as soon as he gets it back and reveals that he's not really a woman after all. But this image of Thor dressed up as a bride with the ring of keys at his belt pretty much became the picture of the perfect Viking housewife. And the problems with this, as there's like 3 examples in the literature of women with keys, and most of them are from the 1200s. And I found about 20 examples of women with weapons in the histories and the sagas. And there's another like 60 or 70 if you count all the Valkyrie names in the poems and the mythology. So you've got like 70 women with weapons versus 3 women with keys. So why do we hang on to that idea that most women were housewives? Part of the problem is that in the 20th century and continuing today, a lot of feminist scholars have put a lot of time and effort into proving that the housewives contributed a lot to Viking society. And if you think about it, it really makes sense because these are places where winter is like 10 months long and the growing season is 2 months. So being able to preserve and store and plan food and stretch it when necessary and make sure everybody is healthy is an enormous job. It is really important. And then the women, the housewives, also were the weavers. They were in charge of the clothing, the tapestries, and even the sails. And if you think, okay, you're not going to be a Viking and go anywhere if you don't have a sail. This is really important work. You're not going to survive a winter in Norway without a cloak. So, it was very important to have housewives. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to belittle the importance of the Viking housewife. There has to be some, whether they had keys or not, I don't know. But, running the farm was a seriously important job. But not every woman had to do that for the society to function. So, over and over again, one thing that I was asking when I'm writing this book is, how do we know that? I mean, how do we know that it was the ultimate thing for a woman to be a housewife? Maybe some of them wanted to do something else. And how do we know that all the warriors were men? Well, now that we have the DNA test of Bj581, we know that not all of the warriors were men. If you look at statistical averages, men are probably bigger than women. But if you look around you, you can see a lot of women who are big enough, and a lot of men who are puny. So it's not necessarily, a gender thing. It's a size and a strength and an ability and an ambition kind of thing that decides whether you're going to be the housewife or the warrior. And in the book, I clearly make that distinction because I have Queen Gunnhild, mother of kings, who we know from Snorri's Heimskringla was very small and pretty. And she has lots and lots of children, so she is pregnant like most of the time we know her, while she is being queen and leading, making strategies for war and pushing her husband and sons into battle. And I established her as the one who teaches about weaving and about cloth and about dyeing and that sort of thing. And her daughter, who follows in her footsteps, is married off to the Earl of Orkney and is supposed to have children but doesn't manage to. I imagine that she has the same, qualities as her mother, that she is small and that she is very good with her hands and is interested in creative, work. Whereas her foster sister, Hervor, is this hugely tall and strong woman who just wants to do athletic things. She's like the Olympic athlete or the woman who joins the Marines, today. She's not going to sit in the house and do embroidery. No. So, I understand that there are different roles for different kinds of women. Yeah, she's a tomboy, but that wasn't a bad thing.
So yeah, you've incorporated these real women that we know of into the fictional story of Hervor. There were quite a few from different places that Hervor may have travelled. Were there any that you didn't incorporate that you wanted to, but it just didn't fit in the timeline or the movements of Hervor?
Well, I should first tell you about the ones that did make it into the story.
Please do.
I mean, Queen Gunnhild, Mother of Kings. I mean, she deserved the whole book to herself. She's like this fantastic character who appears in 11 of the Icelandic sagas, and she's mentioned in several histories. She is always the villain. I mean, the people, the men writing about her in the 1200s and later, they just really despise the idea that this tiny woman could be ruling Norway. One of them makes it clear that the years that she was ruling beside her sons, they call the Age of Gunnhild. It was all about her. She's considered a witch. She's supposed to know all these magical potions and poisons. She kills a lot of people by poison in the book. There's also a suggestion she might have actually been an archer. Snorri mentions this very interesting scene where the final battle where King Haakon of Norway is killed. Gunnhild and her sons are on the battlefield. The king is hit by an arrow, and there's a question about who shot the arrow. And Snorri says that something like, it is said by many that Gunnhild's servant ran through the crowd saying, "Make way for the Kingslayer," and that the servant boy was the one who shot the arrow. But then Snorri says, but nobody really knows who did it. And I see, oh, Snorri, you're really trying hard not to say that Queen Gunnhild did it. Because you think about the queen with her, her servant boy, her page boy, and he's running ahead saying, "Make way for the Kingslayer." Well, that's her. She's the one following. It's like, oh, really? So, that's a leap. I speculate, but knowing Snorri as I do, I think he was really trying very hard not to give her credit, but it was hard not to tell the story. So anyway, she's a fantastic one. She ends up ruling Norway. She also meddles in the politics in York in England and in Orkney and probably in Dublin too, because they're exiled to the British Isles for a while. But she's definitely a character that people need to know about. The second historical person that Hervor meets is this Viking chieftain who is called the Red Girl, and she appears in an Irish history, the War of the Irish with the Foreigners, and she's in a list with 15 other named Viking leaders who are harassing the town of Munster in the middle of the 10th century, so about the time when Hervor would have been living in Dublin. So I have Hervor meet her in Dublin and actually go and fight with her for a while. And then the final person that's in the book, real featured in the book, is Queen Olga of Kiev. And her story is told in the Russian Primary Chronicle, and it has for a long time been considered, legendary and mythical, and that she couldn't possibly have done the things that are in the chronicle, such as devising the strategy to avenge her husband's death, and another leading an army that destroys a city. But then recently, archaeologists have been digging at that city, and they find that, yeah, it was burned down at about that time when she was, in charge. So they're finding more and more evidence that she really was real, and that she was, in charge, and she was, a warrior queen in some ways. There's also a story about her son's last battle, the Battle of the Danube, and this is like 971. And there's a Byzantine historian who says that when the victorious Byzantine army went on the field, they found women in armor like the men. And he even repeats himself, women who were fighting just like the men. And it's like, okay, that's a pretty unbiased source, that there were Viking women warriors fighting with the men, but other scholars read it differently. But Hervor couldn't have been there, because that battle happened in 971. Yeah, I wanted her to be there. I really wanted to make her there, but it happened in 971, and she's buried in Birka, probably before 970. So 965 to 970. And it would have been really stretching it to have her go along in the army and be there at that battle. And then she'd have to survive too. So I was really pushing my luck there. That's probably the only real historical example where there was something happening that I couldn't get her into. The other problems I solved by having her be told the stories of some of these women. So she learns the story when she's a little girl of Queen Ausa of Vestfold, because she lives in the same area where Queen Ausa is buried, and Ausa is always been associated with this huge burial mound where the Oseberg ship was discovered. And in the Oseberg ship, there are 2 women buried. This is really the most elaborate Viking burial that we've ever discovered and been able to excavate. And it's the most beautiful ship with all carving on it. And there are these 2 women who were buried there about 100 years before Hervor lived. So I imagine that she is told the story, which was associated with this mound, of who these 2 women were, and that one of she's told the story of Queen Elsa, and then I tell the story of the 2 women in the ship, and we don't really know who they are. There's also the Valkyrie Brynhild, and this story has been told over and over and over in many, many, many different versions. In the Middle Ages, it became the basic story in Wagner's opera, The Ring of the Nibelungs. It's all about the love triangle between Brynhild the Valkyrie and Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, and the woman he marries, Gudrun. But the oldest versions of it are more about Brynhild being a warrior woman who does not want to get married and being forced to marry. So the whole the whole tone of the story changes over time, from being her wish to remain in the war band, fighting alongside the kings, and bloodying her sword, and her duty to get married and have children, and procreate the line, and this kind of thing. So I get to play with that story a bit in the book, because obviously Hervor wants her to remain a warrior and not get married, and some of the other versions, she does get married. So there's a lot that I can play with, especially since I'm using the fictional techniques to try to imagine what would her reaction be when she heard this story. So anyway, those are some of the kinds of stories that I get to tell, and the people that you can meet. There's also a really cool woman named Thornbjörg in one of the Icelandic sagas, who is her father's only child, and she's also since childhood been interested in athletic endeavors, let's say, riding and using the spear and sword and fighting. And her father says, this is really unladylike. You should be in the house with your mother learning how to do embroidery. And she says, Father, you don't have any sons. When you die, who is going to protect your kingdom? I'm going to inherit it. And unless you want like the first guy to come along and marry me and take your kingdom, you should let me defend myself. And he thought that was a very good argument. And so he gave her part of the kingdom to practice so that she could, like be an apprentice king while he's still alive and he can help her out. And so she is in charge of this town that really looks a lot like Birka, from what the archaeologists tell us Birka looked like. And it's, a fortified town, and a lot of people come and try to take it. And, she's in charge of the defenses. Eventually, she does lose because of the way, these sagas are generally written. She loses. She marries the guy. He's actually very proud of her warrior, ability, and appreciative of it. They have some kids, and then he disappears, and she understands that he's been captured in Ireland. So she puts together an army. She, calls in his foster brother in Denmark and another guy in Norway, and she puts together this huge army. They sail off to Ireland. She's in charge. They break into the town. They're coming into where they think he is being held captive, and he suddenly like bursts out the door, and there's this wonderful scene in which they come face to face, and it's told like from his point of view, where he comes out the door and he sees this huge warrior standing in front of him, in complete armor, and he of course has just escaped from prison, so he doesn't have his weapons, and he's like, oh no, what am I going to do? And then the warrior lifts off the helmet, and it's his wife.
Wow.
And he says, oh, I'm so happy to see you. But there's this like gorgeous scene where he doesn't recognize her. She's like this scary big warrior, and he doesn't recognize her. It's just like a wonderful, little part of this saga. So anyway, I got to include some of that even, it's not during Hervor's lifetime. She didn't hear the story, but I tell it anyway. When I'm describing, Birka as a
I love it. You have it. You fit so much in, and I think it was it was brilliant because I don't know a lot about anything more than just your regular pop culture kind of Vikings things. So it was really good to get get lots of different stories and lots of different names and stuff. Like you mentioned before, lots of people are going to be more familiar with the Vikings just with Marvel and with Thor and Loki. And even the Vikings television show, which I think is the History Channel, I think. And how they...
Yeah, the History Channel. Oh, that's like wonderful.
It's brilliant. How do they go about portraying women on that show? Would you say that they have done quite a good job, or it's more fanciful? What do you think about their portrayal of women?
They kind of... turned me into a fan like right away with the very first episode. I was expecting not to like this, because it's hard for me sometimes to even read a novel set in the Viking Age because I know too much and I keep finding little things that are wrong, and it kicks me out of the story. Well, so here, the very first episode of the Vikings TV show, it starts with this totally cliched Viking raid. The big hairy men with the swords, and they beach their boats, and they run through the beautiful little village, and they're killing people, setting houses on fire, and the camera singles out this, blonde woman and her beautiful little children, and it's like, what's going to happen? They're all going to die. And the woman tells the children to hide. The raiders break into the house, and I'm like, oh, great, we begin with the rape scene. Well, that's not what happens. It's just like... you have this image of this, beautiful, vulnerable woman. This is Lagertha, played by Catherine Winnick, and she whips the poker out of the fire, and she beats the crap out of these two men. And it's like this awesome fight scene. she's obviously, a well-trained martial artist, and they are not. They're just big dumb guys. And they have maybe raw strength, but she's like shows them so clearly that a lifetime of training is way more important than size or weight. And after that I was like, okay, Michael Hurst, you can make any historical mistakes you want. Like, some people say the costumes are like totally out of line because they're not realistic. I'm like, yeah, but they look good. So, it's like having that, I don't know, upending that expectation of what, women's roles were like, I thought was just brilliant. And then, when I started researching this book and I'm reading Saxo Grammaticus, I come across Lagertha, and she's actually very much like she's portrayed, by Catherine Winnick in the History, Channel Vikings. I mean, Saxo calls her a skilled female fighter who would do battle in the forefront of the most valiant warriors. And Ragnar Lothbrok falls in love with her because she saves him in this one battle. I mean, like, she wins the battle all by herself. And it's like, okay, this is not exactly the vision of Viking women that, I grew up with. That it's time that we, heard about some of these women. And I mean, Saxo is just as misogynistic as Snorri, but he can't tell some of the stories about, the Viking Age without including these warrior women. And there's a whole list of them in in his books. Some of them are, they're the standard bearer for the army. I mean, that means they're holding the flag next to the king. They're the last defense of the king. And, it's like, wow. Big important position for women.
Wow. It's so nice to know that. I mean, especially because that scene was so prominent, like it was at the very beginning, like setting it sets up the whole vibe of the whole show, that that women are going to be strong and they're going to be forefront. It's going to be great.
It does, yeah. Yeah, no, they started right out on the right foot. I mean, of course, there's a lot in the History Channel Vikings that is not history. We know that, but one of the things that is fun for me watching it is that I can pinpoint a lot of the sources, and I can say, oh yeah, okay, you got that right, and yeah. So that was one. Lagertha was just terrific.
Yeah, I loved it. I love that show. It's so good. Like, it's just as someone who didn't know anything about Vikings when I first started watching it, and now I can appreciate it more, knowing a bit more about Vikings, which is, it's what you like to see, right? Maybe one more question, unless there's something else. I was going to say, why do you think we are still so fascinated by the Vikings today?
Well, we talked a lot about Snorri Sturluson being a misogynist and being an awful person, but I think it's really because of him and the stories that he wrote down and the stories that, other people inspired by him or even taught by him wrote down. I have said before, and I'd say it again, he is the greatest writer of the Middle Ages. When I started taking medieval literature in college, I read Beowulf, and I read the Canterbury Tales, and I read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and the Legends of King Arthur, and then I read an Icelandic saga. I read Njal Saga, and I was like blown away. The saga was about real people living in a real and difficult land, and it was this complete, beautifully imagined world from the past. It was more like a historical novel than anything else I read from the Middle Ages. And I think we have Snorri Sturluson to thank for that. He wrote many sagas, such as 16 of them about the kings of Norway. He was responsible for writing down almost everything we know about Norse mythology, for preserving hundreds of lines of Viking poetry. He might have written Egil Saga, which is the first of the Icelandic family sagas, so it's like the beginning of a whole new genre. And if you look at the quality of what was written in Iceland before his time and what came afterwards, you can see that he really put his mark on saga style. His works and those, by his nephews and other people that he was, in contact with and influenced, are really masterpieces. And I'd say they're every bit as good as Shakespeare. And I'm not the first one to say that. J.R.R. Tolkien argued that about 100 years ago, that Snorri was more important to read than Shakespeare because he had more influence on our language and on our world. I'd say the second factor in why we still love the Vikings is those beautiful ships. You know, the Viking ships that were dug out of the blue clay of southern Norway and recovered from Danish harbors. They are beautiful ships, but they wouldn't have as much meaning for us if we didn't have the stories to go along with them, if we didn't know from the sagas where the Vikings traveled in their ships and how dangerous and exciting it was. And for that, you have to have the sagas. So I come back to the sagas as being, the reason that we still love the Vikings. But it's not just having, it's not just having texts. It's not just having information. It's the quality of the stories. And Snorri really was a storyteller. He writes these things with, pacing and humor and suspense and great characters that just really make you want to keep reading.
That's a sign of a good book if you don't want to put it down, that's for sure. Thank you so much, Nancy, for being with me today and doing this interview. Your book, The Real Valkyrie, is it available to purchase yet?
It will be out on the 31st of August.
Beautiful. So 31st of August. So by the time this interview comes out, it will be available to purchase. So we will put the link to buy that, and also any Nancy's website you'll be able to find down below. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been brilliant.
Thanks a lot, Kelly.
This video was brought to you by World History Encyclopedia. For more great articles and interactive content, head to our website via the link below. World History Encyclopedia is a non-profit organisation, so if you'd like to support our work, you can head to our Patreon via the link in the top corner of the screen or via the Patreon link down below. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon with another video.